You know the saying, plan for the worst, hope for the best. Well, this particular challenge is something I didn't plan for when moving to Switzerland as a doctor. To be honest, I didn't even really anticipate it. Turns out, even paracetamol can be hard to prescribe if you don't know what it's called in your country of practice. So if you don't want to find yourself in an uncomfortable situation dealing with a septic patient with a nurse asking you if they can start the Roflagil IV and you have no clue what it is, this video is for you. Welcome back, guys. For those of you who are new here, my name is Sarah, and after graduating from King's in London, I moved to Switzerland, where I'm currently working as an internal medicine resident. I make videos about medicine, life as a doctor, and all things Switzerland. Now, you might be wondering what I'm on about. Medicine is an international language, and we all practice it in a broadly similar way. That may be true. But in Switzerland, it's very common practice to use brand names for medication instead of generic names. This can be a huge problem and a big hassle for doctors. There's already such a breadth of knowledge that we need to know without having to add brand names on top of that. It would be a lot easier to use generic names, but for the moment, if you want to work in Switzerland, I would say it's pretty much a requirement. You don't necessarily need to memorize them, but you need to be familiar with them. And if I were starting out in Switzerland again, I would familiarize myself with these ASAP. And this is the list that I would have wanted to have. This is going to be a very quick video. It's by no means exhaustive, but I've just tried to cover in broad categories the main medications that you'll see on a day-to-day basis just to get you started and get you familiar with the ABCs, I would say, of medicine. So we're going to go through 5 quick categories, and within them, I'll state the brand name, so you'll have a second or two to come up with the generic name and see how ready you are to work as a doctor in Switzerland. Let's start with painkillers and the very basics that we all know, Dafalgan and Perfalgan. The generic name for this is paracetamol. So Perfalgan is just the IV version because perfusion, a perfusion, an IV line. So it just denotes the method of administration, but they're both paracetamol. Irfen, that's pretty easy. Irfen is ibuprofen. A very common anti-inflammatory we all use. Another common anti-inflammatory is Toradol. That is the brand name for Ketorolac. A very common medication, especially in the emergency department, given IV for renal colic, for example. And the last one we're going to mention here is Temgesic. Temgesic is the brand name for buprenorphine. Right, moving on to anti-emetics. So, the 2 most common ones you'll probably hear are going to be Paspertin and Primperan. They are both brand names for metoclopramide, identical molecules. The next one is Motilium. For some reason, I struggled remembering this one, but the generic name is domperidone. And finally, the other antiemetic brand name you should know is Zofran, and the generic name is ondansetron. Out of all the antiemetics, I'd say ondansetron, so ondansetron, is the most likely one that you'll hear said as a generic name rather than the brand name, but you will hear Zofran said commonly as well. Moving swiftly on, we now get to antibiotics. So the first brand name to know is Rosefin. The generic name of this is ceftriaxone. They could have made our lives easier by at least making them similar sounding, but no. And the second antibiotic, which is 2 antibiotics combined, is Roflagil. This is a very common combination you'll hear for GI infections, and it's Rosefin and Flagil. So Roflagil, and the generic name is ceftriaxone and metronidazole. So the Flagil is metronidazole. Again, you don't need to memorize these, but I just think it's helpful to know what people are on about when they say these things around you, because it can be very disorientating, especially if you're still learning the language as well, and now you're having to figure out what medication they're talking about. Quick pit stop by the Benzodiazepines. So there's 2 very common ones we use in hospital all the time. Cilistat is typically the medication we'll use for alcohol withdrawal, and the generic name is oxazepam. The second brand name, benzo, is Timistat, which is another very common one, and the generic name is lorazepam. Last but not least, we get to the laxatives. So this was a very humbling experience for me because it's pretty much the first medications you learn as an F1 in the UK, and all of a sudden I don't even know what basic laxatives are called. So it was a bit of a struggle. I think it's the first ones that I learned the equivalent of, so I definitely recommend getting used to these early. So our first brand name is Movicol, and the generic name is not too far off, it's Macrogol, otherwise known as polyethylene glycol. This is your basic osmotic laxative that you prescribe from day 1 as an F1. The next one is Dufalac, and Dufalac's generic name is lactulose. So this one's the non-absorbable sugar that we use as a laxative and in hepatic encephalopathy. So we've got Fricaclis Clister, it's a bit of a mouthful, and the generic name for that is phosphate enema. And last but not least, we have Bulboid, which is also known as a glycerol suppository. So there you have it. That was a whistle-stop tour of common brand names of medications in Switzerland that I had to familiarize myself with very early on, and I would strongly recommend if you're planning on making the move here. I hope this video is useful. If you have other things you'd like to know about being a doctor in Switzerland, drop it in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!